Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 535 for May 22nd, 2023. I am Brendan Cappy.
And I'm Jay Ledbetter.
Thanks for joining us this weekend, everyone. Jay, the most important question that's on our minds here, over under. How much shorter will this episode be than our review of Fast X?
Yeah, we're going to cover 6 or 7 movies today, and I bet it comes in under that review of Fast X. It's a long one. And got to give the people what they want, which is the maximum review.
Maximum Family is what they did on that specific episode there. I guess for a little context for all of our listeners out there, so everyone knows what we're talking about. We did just publish a review of Fast X, the latest film in the Fast and Furious franchise. That review was conducted by J.D. Duran and Ryan McQuaid. And the episode was only focused on not just Fast X, but overall the Fast and Furious franchise. Ryan gave his thoughts on the franchise as a whole, which is something we did in episode 534 last weekend. And the episode ended up being, what, Jay, an hour and 47 minutes? Something like that?
That is correct.
Yeah. It wasn't a short episode. There was a lot of content, a lot of great content. We urge you all to go and listen to it, but it did prompt this fun conversation offline between the four of us, kind of doing this bet, who's going to have the shorter episode this weekend. And I feel like, Jay, we sort of got the advantage when we saw that timestamp and we thought, I think we got this one. We're going to test the waters here. We have a lot to cover here, but I think time is on our side here.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not a goal for us to necessarily go shorter, but generally when you and I are on an episode together, we practice brevity a little bit more.
We talked about this offline. I think it was your suggestion. It was a really funny suggestion. Get some professional here to analyze the differences between these two specific episodes and really discover what is it that you and I do differently that makes these episodes normally shorter? We call this the Jay and Brendan special. It's usually very short.
And it's not done yet. Maybe we'll go 3 hours today. I don't know.
We our mouths could be bigger than our stomachs right now. And we may end up, eating those words in just a moment. But yet normally you and I tend to practice a little bit more brevity. I think we also talk a little bit faster too. And maybe that's part of it, but I don't know. For those of you listening,
can't attribute it all to that. Yeah.
No, I think there's a lot more to it than that. So maybe our listeners can help us out. Why are our episodes a little bit shorter? Leave a comment.
Please,
let us know.
Psychoanalyze us.
Yes,
Bring
please.
it on.
Any feedback that you have in this particular avenue right here. But we do have a lot to cover on this specific episode, and I'm looking forward to this one. We decided to do a 2023 catch-up episode where Jay and I will be sharing some thoughts on films from this year that we didn't get a chance to do an official review of. And this is exciting. This is something that we used to do a lot, Jay, during the old format of the main show. We had these discussion breaks. We would do some quick catch-ups for films that were either covered on Extra Film or just not covered at all. We wanted to at least talk about them in some way. And there's always an opportunity to do this. There's always going to be a film, or in this case, films, that deserve at least some discussion that we just don't have time to do official reviews of everything, which basically means this probably won't be the only time we do an episode like this year. I'm sure there'll be another 2023 catch-up episode somewhere down the line. Maybe JD will join us for one of those as well when he's back here full time. But I'm looking forward to this, Jay. On the docket for this specific catch-up episode, we've got quite an interesting lineup here. We're going to start off with 3 films specifically that you and I have both seen. And some of these very popular films. We'll start off with the Super Mario Brothers movie, which is honestly a film I'm surprised we didn't give a full review to, given the numbers.
I think it's the highest grossing film of the year.
Something like that. There's more to it than that. I've got some financials here I'm going to go over as we get into that here, which are pretty surprising. Coupled with that, we're also going to talk about the latest in the Evil Dead franchise, Evil Dead Rise, of another film that kind of surprised we didn't give a full review to. It's actually one we thought about for a while. We just couldn't fit it into the schedule. So those will be two that we talk about together, and we'll round out that first segment talking about the film Tetris, starring Taron Egerton, which is available on Apple TV Plus, if I'm not mistaken. One of those streaming services. It's hard to keep track
spin
of
the
all.
wheel and figure out which streamer it's on.
That's basically a game now. I'm surprised it's not on like Price is Right or something like that at this point.
And just keep in mind, it's not HBO Max anymore. It's just
not
Max.
Oh, that's going to be so hard to get into that new habit, just calling it Max.
Yeah. It's a bad name.
It's a bad name. Yeah, we talked about that a lot on whatever episode that was. We talked about why that was a bad name and so bad for marketing. Anyway, yes, I got to get used to that. But that'll be the first segment here. And then afterwards, Jay and I have a few films that we each caught up with that only one of us has seen. So, Jay, you'll give some thoughts on Guy Ritchie's The Covenant, which I believe is the official title, right? It's not just The Covenant.
It is. Yes.
Guy
He
Ritchie's
got
The
John
Covenant.
Carpenter treatment. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, kind of like the
auteur.
the Lee Daniels treatment. You know how he always does that as well with like the Butler and things like that. So yeah, you'll talk about the latest from
Voice
Guy
of a
Ritchie.
generation, Guy Ritchie.
Oh yeah, got it. Yep. So you'll talk a little Guy Ritchie there. You'll also talk about the World War II revenge flick Sisu. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Sisu,
Yes.
I think it's called.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking forward to that one. I tried watching that in preparation for this review, but didn't get a chance to finish it in time. So I'll leave you with the floor on that one. And I'll give some quick thoughts on the documentary Still, a Michael J. Fox movie, which is one I think is pretty important. I actually really do recommend people check that one out. If that's not a spoiler to my thoughts on the film, I don't know what is. But I'll give some quick thoughts on that.
That's
that's
the
the review.
love.
That's the review. That's the brevity that we're talking about there. But yes, that'll be on the docket for this particular main show episode. We'll, of course, round out this show with our poll asking all of you, what is your favorite Fast and Furious action sequence? Really fun question there. Looking forward to those results. But, Jay, we're here to talk about 2023. It's almost the end of May. We're not quite at the mid-year yet. I don't know about you. I feel kind of behind when it comes to new release movies, at least more so than I've been in previous years. I don't know how you feel about that.
I feel like I'm behind, but then I look at the movies that I haven't seen, and I'm kind of like,
am I behind? Yeah, that's a great point, and I hate to say that, with the speculation that these are films that are not that good or ones that I would not really like. Of course, we'd like to give films a fair shake, but it's not like the end of the year when we're trying to cram things that we feel like are necessary for us to see. It's not quite in that vein just yet. I think I've only seen about 20 films from this year thus far.
Like 26 or 27 or something.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not. Usually, I end up seeing about 120. So but statistically, I am definitely behind. But
Yep. Same here. I think around this time, I'm usually near like 40-ish or something. I mean, give or take. It really depends on the year, honestly. But yeah, I feel a little bit behind, but there's still some films worth talking about for sure. As I laid out there in our little blueprint of sorts, on the docket, we've got a few films that we're going to talk about together. The first one being the Super Mario Brothers movie. Again, a film I am surprised we did not give a full review to. This is the latest animated film from Illumination. Of course, this is based on the popular Nintendo video game series, which is already in and of itself a reason to talk about this movie, because Nintendo has been so, I guess, notorious for not allowing any of their properties to be made into feature films. I mean, if you look at the history of video game,
93 Super Mario Brothers.
When's the last time you saw that movie?
It's been, 15 years or something.
Yeah, I barely remember it, but I'm genuinely
Some
curious.
people are starting to stick up for it, and I gotta say, I mean, I don't know. Maybe if I rewatch it, I like it. Chill out.
There's a common trend nowadays, right, where people go back and try to retroactively defend movies that weren't well defended at the time. And in a lot of cases, it's deserved. But in some other cases, I don't know if that's how it is with this movie here, the 1990s version of Super Mario Brothers. But it almost feels like this attempt to try to do that with anything that just got bad reviews at the time, as if there are these
people. It's people who grew up with it in their childhood who now have this critical perspective, trying to merge their childhood love for something with their new critical thinking when it comes to film and
Yeah.
trying to put kind of that square peg in that round hole. And I'm not sure they've entirely convinced me on Super Mario Brothers yet.
Nostalgia blinders, man. Nostalgia
A little bit,
blinders.
a little bit.
Yeah, but in some cases it works. In some cases, maybe not so much. But anyway, the Super Mario Brothers movie, the latest film from Animation Studios, Illumination. I mentioned that there are some financials that are worth noting with this movie. And it's, again, another reason why we probably should have talked about it. Jay, you very jokingly said the highest grossing movie of the year so far. That's an understatement. That's an understatement.
Yeah.
The film is at, it's like $1.2 billion worldwide. It's a film that is now
crazy.
in the $1 billion club. It's apparently the biggest worldwide opening weekend for an animated film ever. It's also the highest grossing film based on a video game. That's not saying much, but I think the most impressive stat here is that apparently right now it is the 4th highest grossing animated film of all time, which is pretty insane.
What is it behind? Do you have the list? I don't know what the tops are. It's Minions,
I believe,
right?
Well, I got to see if I can find the list again. I think this is I don't think this is adjusted for inflation, so I think we need to keep that in mind. Yeah, but I believe it's behind the first 2 Frozens, and
Frozen's.
I think also behind the 2019 version of The Lion King, which we're technically considering an animated film. So I'd have to double check that, but I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense.
For some reason,
the film,
I thought it was Minions.
I think that's high up there.
I'm glad it's
as
not.
we're talking, we'll because I'm sure we have some listeners out there who are chomping at the bit to correct us on these things.
Yeah.
So I'll do some research here as we get into our thoughts on the movie. I do want to make a quick note that it was directed by Aaron Horvath and Michael Jelenic, I believe their names are. This is the same team behind Teen Titans Go, and I remember that movie getting some fairly decent buzz when it came out. So it made me kind of excited for this movie, and knowing that the financials have been really, I guess, alluding to something that at least kids are certainly enjoying. I wanted to see how well it held up for at least our critical minds here. Jay, what did you think of the Super Mario Brothers movie?
So first of all, highest grossing animated films of all time. Frozen 2, number 1. Frozen, number 2. That's insane.
Wow. Yeah. Good,
Super Mario Brothers is currently number 3.
Oh, it's number 3. Okay.
Super Mario Bros. 3. Number 4 is Incredibles 2.
Okay.
Good movie. But
like that movie a lot.
Lion King new version actually is not on this list. So maybe it is actually, it's not on this list. So maybe it is actually number 3. But
yeah,
I'm seeing Lion King 1994, which is in 11th place. I bet with inflation,
that's probably way higher. Yeah.
Yeah, way, way higher. But anyway, the Super Mario Brothers movie. This is I almost didn't even put a star rating for this movie on Letterboxd because I don't feel like it is a movie targeted at anyone who has cognitively matured beyond a middle school level. It is an Illumination film, and we kind of know Illumination's MO at this point, more or less, right? They do the Minions films. They do the Despicable Me. They do The Secret Life of Pets.
Yeah.
They do films targeted directly at 7-year-olds, right? And there is a place for that. I'm not going to sit here and say that we need to completely disregard those films, especially as a new dad.
That's the thing. They're really good at not just making films like that, but they're really good at marketing them to that demographic as well.
And as you get to watching more of these shows, you just realize most of the stuff is just garbage, like just unbearable. And this is not unbearable. This is not unbearable at all. And it's interesting because as I was kind of reflecting on it, right after I finished it, I was just thinking, yeah, that movie offers nothing to any adult. But then as I was thinking back to it, I was just thinking, wait, there's a reference that only the adults will understand every 3 minutes in that movie. So it is this weird kind of balance. Yeah. Overall, I thought it was okay-ish. Right? I mean, that's kind of where I landed.
I think this is why this is going to be a short episode, because I feel like a lot of these films are going to have very okay-ish reactions.
Kind of. I wish it was a lot better. I wasn't mad at it again because I had to put it in context of kind of what it is and what it's striving to do.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating when you see this film that is so broad with these stakes that you've seen a million times before. And then you'll have this reference to like, oh, I've played Mario Kart. There's the blue shell. That's the blue shell from Mario
There's the Rainbow
Kart.
Bridge. Yep. All that.
Rainbow Bridge. And there are fun parts. I think the voice performances, as maligned as, Chris Pratt was when he was cast, I think the voice performances are good. Let me be clear. You cannot do an entire movie where Mario talks like Mario from the video game. It would be awful.
And they at least addressed it in the movie in a very passing joke that the accents were kind of there on purpose for a certain ad placement. Which
they're exaggerated.
I will at least say that was pretty clever. I'll give the film some credit there.
They also have the cameo at the very beginning from the actual Mario actor at the arcade game.
Yeah.
But I think Jack Black especially is very good in his role, and he's got the song that's gone a little viral. It's, I don't know. What do you say about the Super Mario Brothers at the age of 32? I still like the Mario games. They're fun, and I understand.
That's what I was going to ask you, if you had a history with the games at all. Yeah,
sophisticated games of all time, but they're fun. But I'm willing. There's a conversation to be had about the artistic merit of video games and the artistic expectations you have for video games versus the expectations of films. And I would say generally my artistic interest in video games is lower, as much as that might set some people off. But I'm certainly okay with a video game just being a platformer and being fun and not going into the lore of the world or whatever. But with a film, I expect a little more, and I understand that this film, if my son was 6 or 7 years old, he would eat this thing alive. He would just devour it, and he would buy all the toys, and I'd be, neck deep in Mario memorabilia in his playroom. But as far as my enjoyment watching the film, it was there. It kind of passed over me. Never going to think about it again. Never going to watch it again unless my kid wants to watch it. But I wasn't mad at it. It's, it's just sort of there.
I was a little bit more mad at it. But again, I think I'm coming at it with maybe a different sense of history. But it's like, to your point, is that really a fair viewpoint for a film like this that's really functioning more as an Illumination film than it is a film based on a Nintendo property? And when I kind of look at it that way, I guess I'm more willing to forgive its banalities, but at the same time, as someone that I'm not much of an avid gamer myself, but I'm a big fan of the Nintendo properties, not just with Mario, but The Legend of Zelda, Star Fox, just to name a few. That's really what I grew up playing. All my friends were off playing PlayStation 2 or whatnot. I was in the basement playing my Nintendo GameCube. That was my thing. So I kind of have this like nostalgic connection to these properties, which is why deep down I was hoping for something that felt more like a Mario movie than it did an Illumination movie. And that's why I'm a little bit disappointed in the final product, because despite the fact that the film is not technically terrible, it barely ever feels like a Mario movie. It feels more like the Mario aesthetic was used to just make an Illumination film. And if that's what you're going for, then I guess that's fine for what it is. It's not really any better or worse than most other movies that Illumination has produced these days. I think it's in the same vein as movies like The Secret Life of Pets or even its sequel. It's just unfortunate, given my love and respect for the Super Mario Brothers as a platform, and to see it only partially represented here is a little bit disappointing, which is why this is not fair to the movie, but maybe this is what's fueling my anger a little bit. The film has been such a huge hit that I have heard rumbling of Illumination working with Nintendo on future properties going forward. And that scares me, given some of the properties that Nintendo has owned and produced over the years. I mean, I could easily see Illumination working with properties like, let's say, Star Fox, for instance, and basically making an animated Guardians of the Galaxy movie, essentially. But I do not want them touching The Legend of Zelda or Metroid Prime, or just Metroid in general, because those are all driven by story and ideas and deep thinking, and real visceral qualities that are not really part of the Super Mario Brothers ethos, right? And that's, I guess, the thing that scares me and why I felt a little bit disheartened by the film, because I'm just kind of looking ahead and hoping for things that don't happen. And again, that's not fair to the Super Mario Brothers movie, but it does make me feel a little bit uneasy about the film that we did get for those reasons. But yeah, the film, I barely remember it since seeing it. I'm kind of in that same boat as you. I think the voice casting is okay. Chris Pratt's actually not bad in the role. I kind of like, I don't think he's that bad. I think if there's any weak link in the voice acting category, it's probably Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong, who sounds like he's not even trying. It just sounds like Seth Rogen being Seth Rogen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Jack Black is really throwing his voice quite a bit, and I don't know if that's in post production like they did with Keegan-Michael Key as Toad. I'm not really sure. There's probably a mixture of both happening there, but you can kind of tell he's really trying to stand out. So there are moments from a performative standpoint where I can tell the film is at least trying to have some ounce of sincerity for its property. But I weirdly like the film more when it just leaned into its into its nostalgia, into the member berries, if you will. And I think it honestly needed a little bit more of that.
Yeah, because the alternative, the other half of the film is, like you said, an Illumination movie, and I don't think Illumination is exactly the official animation studio of InSession Film, to say the least. But
not quite.
They have their thing. They make a crap load of money. And more power to them. Kids love their movies, and there is a place for that in the film world. The kind of the critical reception to this was annoying, I think, or at least the dialogue around the movie when it came out was. It's just what are people expecting? Some of the animation in this is actually pretty impressive, and
I agree.
They have some cool kind of, call them tracking shots. It's animation, so it doesn't really apply. And when they
the movements are pretty
the
inventive.
side-scrolling platformer elements of Mario, I thought that was pretty clever.
I will say, sorry to cut you off there, because there's one moment in particular that takes place in the beginning of the movie that's just Mario and Luigi going through Brooklyn in what mirrors a Super Mario Brothers level. It's actually quite brilliant. Like that scene alone, I could have had a whole movie of just them doing that. It's really well done.
Yeah, I liked that a lot too. That's early on. I was kind of thinking, it's got a little juice to it.
The first 15 minutes are actually really good. I think when this is again something I wanted to talk about, because this movie makes a relatively fair narrative choice that's very different from the game. Because normally the game is about Mario trying to save Princess Peach. In this case, he's trying to save his brother. So the movie essentially swaps the prisoner roles, you could say. Luigi is the one who is taken prisoner, and this time Princess Peach and Mario are together trying to save him, which is not really a bad narrative device. I think the issue is that the time we spend with Mario and Luigi in the beginning is actually quite tender and sweet, that to see them separated almost immediately is kind of unfortunate from a narrative standpoint. And I did miss their camaraderie. I think Charlie Day and Chris Pratt together are really well cast in their respective roles, especially when their voice talents are on screen together.
Yeah, and as far as Peach is concerned, it's got a little bit of that she's not a damsel in distress anymore kind of thing going on, which at times can feel slightly forced. Got a little bit of that girl boss thing going. But Anya Taylor-Joy is mostly good, but you are right. The movie is at its best when it's just Mario and Luigi kind of hanging out, and it makes sense that it would be him searching for Luigi instead of Peach, because he hasn't met Peach yet. So it's kind of the origin of Super Mario Brothers. I have very little doubt they will be making a sequel to this movie. So we will see where they go narratively with that one. But
yeah.
I guess I'll watch it. I don't know. My son will be
Oh,
like
I
4
definitely
or
will.
5 by
Yeah.
then, so I'll watch it. But I don't know. Illumination is a weird thing. It's a weird
It
thing.
is.
Very rarely have animated films truly disregarded adult audiences, which I feel like Illumination mostly does, especially with
Yeah.
Minions. I mean, Minions, and
Yeah.
I actually like the Despicable Me movies. The Minions movies make me want to bang my head against a brick wall until I go unconscious. But there is a real sweetness to the Despicable Me films, and then they just make these out and out, baby movies with Minions, and that's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, we get movies targeted at adults, so why can't kids have movies directly targeted at them, I guess?
Yeah, I think the only thing we ask for as adults is some ounce of sincerity that we're able to at least sense in the product. And there are cases where there are movies that are strictly for children that either have it or they don't. You mentioned Despicable Me from Illumination. That does have a lot of sincerity to it. There is a sense of care for its characters. The filmmakers feel like they actually like those characters and want to dive into who they are without going deep from an adult mentality. But then there are others that just feel childishly cynical, if that's a way to put it. Like they're really just there for a product to take advantage of kids' minds in the theater. And I feel like the Super Mario Brothers movie is kind of straddling that line between the two. There are elements that I feel like, okay, there's some qualities here that I can sense a level of care and authenticity. And then there are other qualities where I just don't. And it kind of splits the difference in the final product, which is why it sounds like we're just so mixed on it overall.
Yeah, very, very mixed. It's interesting. I am very mixed, and I do have a lot of thoughts on it, but also when I'm not thinking about the movie, it's never going to enter my mind. Unless prompted, I'm just not going to think about it, which is... Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, they could have made something a lot more interesting than they did. That's the only reason to be kind of mad at it, because I think there is potential there. And I think they really did. They were creative with some of the visuals in the film. And I think there is a sense of scale to some of the movie that I really appreciated. But narratively, thematically, there's just nothing. There's just nothing there.
Yeah, maybe they'll try a little harder when it comes to the Super Mario Brothers 2 or whatever the heck they decide to call it. As it stands,
you are right. They cannot do Zelda. They
cannot
cannot
do Zelda. I that's one. If I am not a cynical person, Jay, you know this, right? When it comes to movies, I like to give all movies a fair shake, but I will be very close to refusing to even watch a Zelda movie if Illumination makes it. I will be that. I might still see it, but I will be that close to just flat out refusing, because I do not think that property is for Illumination. The sensibilities.
I don't know how you
so
can do
different.
it, and I don't know that the appeal is there for kids. Some of those games have such a sense of melancholy to them.
They do, and if you want to be faithful to the games, and Illumination, as much as I didn't say this felt much like a Mario movie at times, it is still mostly a faithful adaptation, at least visually and aesthetically. But if you want to be faithful to the Zelda games, it's almost unfilmable, right? I mean, like just the overall concept, the fact that you kind of have to make a silent movie when you think about it.
You could have said that about Mario too. Not exactly the most vocal character.
Actually, this could have been a silent movie when you think about it. So, I think about this further. I want to bring this one point up before we transition to the next film on our docket. I'm thinking of the run of video game adaptations that we have had over the years, and I feel like, whether we like this film or not, I feel like there is this slight uptick or resurgence in video game adaptations, not just with film, but also with television, because we obviously just saw the first season of The Last of Us on, now Max, which was very well received and overall very well done. I thought it was actually a pretty good show. But I think back to even movies like, did you see Tomb Raider, the movie with Alicia Vikander in it?
I sure did. That's another one I haven't thought about since they came out. But yes,
I didn't hate that one, though. I mean, it's not great, but It's certainly better than I think most others in its competition. But
They were supposed to do a sequel, and it was supposed to be directed by Ben Wheatley.
I would have been interested in that. I actually would have been pretty curious about that.
I thought
Instead,
McKenna was good, and Goggins was good.
I agree. So instead, Ben Wheatley is now doing the sequel to The Meg, which is just the fact that he's tied to that makes me curious to see that one.
Hot off the heels of Rebecca, he's making The Meg.
The Meg. He also directed a horror movie in between that, In the Earth, which was a
He did
very
the
wonky
COVID
movie.
I have
Yeah,
not seen that movie.
it's interesting. I don't think it all works, but I think as a movie, it's at least pretty interesting. Super Mario Brothers movie. It's available to rent on Prime and all of your other streaming platforms now. It's not one that Jay and I fully responded to, but if you have a 7-year-old, you might want to just go ahead and watch it with them. That's the moral.
You'll be spending a lot of money on toys.
Yes, you will. So you'll lose a lot of money. Now, if there's a movie you should not watch with your 7-year-old, that's a nice transition to our next film on our docket here. We're going to talk a little Evil Dead Rise for this next film in our 2023 catch up. This is the 5th Evil Dead movie, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, we're not counting Ash versus the Evil Dead, the TV show tied to the franchise there, also starring Bruce Campbell. Just as far as the films themselves, this is the 5th one. This one is written and directed by Lee Cronin, whose first film was a little horror film called The Hole in the Ground, which I admittedly have not seen.
Nor have I.
But I've heard decent things about it. And of course, now he is the sole proprietor of this iteration of the Evil Dead franchise, which does answer a couple of questions as to whether this fits into the franchise at all and even how it does, which is kind of interesting. We might talk a little bit about that. The film does star Lily Sullivan, Elisa Sutherland, Nell Fisher, Gabrielle Eccles, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right, and Morgan Davies. I want to highlight them because this is, in many ways, the Evil Dead by the way of a domestic drama. And we've got this family dynamic at play within all of the usual Evil Dead isms here. That'll be a talking point, at least from my perspective. Jay, I guess first off, your thoughts on the Evil Dead films and how you feel about this one by comparison.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Evil Dead movies. Raimi's trilogy, never going to be touched, I don't think, as far as the sequels are concerned. Army of Darkness is actually my favorite one. It's very silly and goofy.
That might be my second favorite.
Evil Dead 2?
I think Evil Dead 2 is my favorite, I think. Yeah.
I mean, Evil Dead 2 is great. Those are like neck and neck for me.
Yeah.
Evil Dead 1 I like, but I don't respond to it the way that a lot of other people do. But
yeah. More of a product for its time that I really respect.
Yeah, especially for the budget that it was made.
Exactly,
but,
yeah.
But as far as this film is concerned, really the one you need to point to as it's a continuation, really, of Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead from 2013?
2013, I think it was, yeah. A full decade ago.
Yeah. And that film, I like a good bit. I like that.
I am with you. I
like Fede Alvarez. I think he's a good director.
He has a certain skill when it comes to quietness and terror, at least when it comes to a movie like Don't Breathe, and then when he's just going to rip your heart out.
Don't get me started.
I know you love that movie quite a bit.
That one was produced by Raimi as well.
Yeah.
And Evil Dead 2013 is a gnarly, nasty movie that strips away most of the comedic kind of winking humor of the original trilogy, and especially Evil Dead 2, and especially Army of Darkness.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it was good and an interesting way to kind of reframe the Evil Dead series.
Yeah.
And so this is tonally, I would say, a continuation of that film.
Yes.
And from the perspective of setting, it feels like I had a really hard time twisting my brain into saying, okay, it's not at a cabin. It's unfair, but it is.
There's still a book.
For me.
There's still a book.
There is the Necronomicon. They established very early. There's actually 3 of them.
Yes,
and one of them just happens to be in the basement of this condemned apartment building.
I guess does that imply that because we see 3 of them in Army of Darkness, right? It's just the implication
Yeah.
that only one of them is real. But I guess maybe by this movie, technically all three of them are real.
Apparently so. I mean,
Yeah.
whatever they need to do to get the film going. Clearly, they're going for a trilogy here. The next one will be called Evil Dead
Dies.
Descend.
Evil Dead dies.
Yes, Evil Dead Resurrection. But for me, this movie, I think, is a victim of expectations in that I think this movie works better without the Evil Dead branding.
Okay.
And I understand that would probably cost them $70 million at the box office. So I understand why they did it. IP and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And again, I was pretty fond of the 2013 version of this film that contained enough kind of superficial ties to the Raimi films to satisfy me in that Evil Dead kind of way. This one is a real left turn as far as the franchise is concerned. Putting it in this, apartment complex in LA, completely different from anything that we have seen. And it's a pretty straightforward, much more straightforward than any of the other Evil Dead films, a straightforward possession movie, which has some really great kills. It's a nice lean movie. It's like right at 90 minutes.
Yeah.
There's just enough emotional meat. It sounds like you think there's a little bit more to chew on.
Yeah. Well, I'll get into that. I'll get into that. Yeah.
But I wish it had a bit more wit, which I even think Fede Alvarez's film, which is gnarly and tonally very different from Raimi's trilogy, but still I think has a little bit of that spirit that I was missing with this one.
It's kind of grossly funny at times, even if it's not really intending to be. There's something about that movie that does have that kind of quality.
It really does, and this one really doesn't. So it's kind of burdened by expectations related to the franchise. It never fully clicked for me, but it is one that I would say, watch it. You might really like it a lot more than me because in a vacuum, there is some really good stuff in this movie.
It does make me think, and I can't recall, Jay, you may have mentioned this in your letterbox blurb for this movie, but it kind of feels like this may have started out as something else that then got morphed into an Evil Dead movie.
That's what it feels like. It feels like 10 Cloverfield Lane or something.
Yeah. It kind of does. And I do think that is pretty unfortunate. I do like the Evil Dead movies quite a bit. Evil Dead 2 is probably my favorite. Army of Darkness. Those two, I'm with you. They kind of go back and forth because they're just so bonkers. They're just absolute bonkers movies. And if I were to rank all five of these in third place, I might actually put Fede Alvarez's film. I like that one quite a bit, and I think it's actually aged pretty well. I think at the time it kind of got dismissed as just being another gory horror film because we were still kind of coming off the heels of the gore fest subgenre, if you will. But that movie, I think that movie is still doing a lot of gnarly things that even those other films would never even dare to do. And a lot of it does come down to that wit that you're talking about. That sense of tone really is, when it comes to horror movies, what tone you choose is what visceral quality a film represents, right? You can have the grossest of movies, but if the tone isn't right, that's not going to land. Which is what I respect about Fede Alvarez's film. I think he nails the tone here, and that's why I didn't think
Jane Levy is a real asset in that movie. Jane Levy is, I am like yelling from the top of a mountain, make Levy
her a star.
Movie star. What are we doing?
Yeah, she's great in that, and she's also really good in Don't Breathe as well. Bringing it right back to Don't Breathe. I was not a fan of Evil Dead Rise, not at all, honestly. And I think the big problem is the way it handles its tone. So that was some foreshadowing there, trying to get into why I don't think this film works. But I kind of need to preface that I think my feelings on Evil Dead Rise are more of a me thing than it is how Lee Cronin is trying to establish tone. Because I'm just inherently one of those people that doesn't really find enjoyment in children being tortured for the sake of horror fun.
Yes, you've been over this before. It's a real thing that sticks in your craw.
Yeah, and to be fair, I guess to help defend myself a little bit, there have been films, even in the horror genre, that do feature families and children in really like horrific peril, and in some cases it's not always treated for seriousness. Like I think of a movie like M. Night Shyamalan's The Visit, for instance, which is kind of a mean and gnarly movie.
That is a nasty movie.
Yeah, but that one weirdly works for me. Like I don't know, there's something about the sense of tone and its consistency in committing to that that I kind of weirdly respect, which is what I don't really like about Evil Dead Rise. And I think it just comes down to that fusion between this domestic drama with the Evil Dead isms that are being pushed into it. And I don't think that synergy works. Seeing what this family goes through, and many of it is just, their fates are not deserved at all. It just didn't sit right with me. And maybe a lot of that too comes down to Lee Cronin's overall direction here. You mentioned that this kind of feels like the most, I don't even know if I want to use the word standard, but I feel like that is the word I want to use. In the realm of the Evil Dead films, this is the most normal horror film, right? And even some of the grotesqueness of it that we come to expect from an Evil Dead film didn't fully land with me. I don't know if it's from a shot composition standpoint or the way that certain things linger on other
things. It lacks
things.
the spirit, I would say, almost fully of the Ring.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people were referencing a moment in this movie involving a cheese grater, okay? That did not make me squirm. And a movie like this should make me squirm. And I think a lot of it just comes down to that hodgepodge of tone that it's just mishandling, or the fact that it lingers on a grotesque moment like that way too briefly. That's the other thing I respect about Fede Alvarez's film, is that when something gross happens, he does not cut away. He just lets you relish in it and forces you to look at it with your eyes held open like Alex from A Clockwork Orange. That's what he's doing. Here, I feel like Lee Cronin's almost afraid to commit to it. And that,
I don't know. There's some pretty gnarly stuff in this. But
yeah,
I don't disagree with. It's not Alvarez's movie.
No, there are some gnarly stuff in it, especially in the final act. But it's, again, it comes back to tone for me and what really solidifies how a horror film works for you. Because seeing some of that grotesque imagery that we get at the end, and it almost goes full John Carpenter or full Cronenberg for a little bit. I'll simply say that for the sake of not getting into spoilers.
That was interesting.
It was.
It was very silly.
Yeah, but it's hard to articulate why I just didn't find it that grotesque, and why watching it I just felt like
I didn't find it grotesque. I found it too goofy to be grotesque.
And, you know, maybe it's a CGI thing, because at least Fede Alvarez's film did rely on a lot of practicality to really make those sequences land. It's really what makes the Evil Dead film so interesting, because there's such a tangible quality to everything that you see. But this one felt very digital. And I think that really hurts it in the long run, especially during those final moments. So, you know, cut this back to a me thing as to why I didn't really respond to this movie, but this didn't work for me. It's easily my least favorite of the Evil Dead films.
I'll say this. I've got the perfect title for it if it isn't an Evil Dead movie. And this is probably already the title of a movie that I don't know about, but Condemned is a great title for this movie. Because the building is condemned. It's a good title.
That's a very good title. That is
really
a very good title. I would not be surprised if that were the working title, if that was the original scripted title. Lee Cronin went to make a Condemned movie, and again, it got in touch with Sam Raimi, and they morphed it into Evil Dead Condemned.
Evil Dead Condemned could be okay too, but I understand Evil Dead Rise. It's a pretty good title. But
yeah, it's not a bad title.
Yeah, I mean, so you did not buy into the dramatic stakes of this movie?
No, and I wanted to, but at the same time I felt a little like on edge in a bad way that we have these kind of dramatic stakes in a movie like Evil Dead. And there was something kind of distasteful about that. Maybe that is the point. It is meant to kind of gross you out in that way. But I don't know, it just felt more like a cheap tactic than a genuine sense of dramatic stakes for me, and that's just something that doesn't normally work for me.
I think it also lacks kind of that strong central character that you get with a Bruce Campbell, or in my opinion you get with a Jane Levy. There is not that actor who the film kind of orbits around, their gravitas and charisma, unfortunately. You know, the characters are almost disregarded in this movie. I could tell you very broad strokes about who these characters are, but none of them really leave a lasting impact in a real way, which is unfortunate because
Yeah.
The Evil Dead 2013 is very much about a person's struggle with addiction.
Yeah.
And you need a performer who can really capture that sense and who you are willing to go on that journey with and really feel for. And I think Jane Levy does a great job in that film of doing that. Here with Alyssa Sutherland, you know, she's going through this. Wait, is Alyssa Sutherland the one that plays the sister or the one?
No,
that
that Lily Sullivan plays the sister. Alyssa Sutherland plays the mother.
Is the mom. Okay, so
Yes.
Lily Sullivan is the one who we're kind of anchored to.
Yeah,
She's the
I
one
see
the
what
film opens on.
You're making a good point here. I have to agree with. I know where you're going with this.
And I just don't think I don't even really have a very poignant point on this, but I just don't think she's a terribly magnetic performer. And Alyssa Sutherland, really, her whole entire arc is disregarded very, very early on when she becomes possessed. And so you really have nothing that grounds you into caring about these things. It just becomes a series of gory deaths.
Which is unfortunate because Alyssa Sutherland gives a rather committed performance here. I really did appreciate what she was doing
as the
the mother.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say if there was a big missed opportunity here and this film really wanted to, I feel like I'm going to massively contradict myself here because I found it so distasteful in the way it treated, torture on children for the sake of horror fun. But if the film wanted to at least be more consistent with that and commit to that sense of distaste, I think the main character should have been the little girl. I think Nell Fisher should have maybe led this.
The
thing.
little girl?
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, they should have. I think they should have done something different. So that's certainly a route they could have taken.
It's certainly a distasteful route. But I mean, Nell Fisher's she's endearing in the small amount of time that she gets. But yeah, you're right. We are anchored by Lily Sullivan's performance here, and doesn't seem like a bad actress, but I just don't think there's enough meat on these bones to give that character something to latch onto, like you're saying. I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, I posited this on Twitter. Is this the grossest movie to ever make $100 million?
I remember you asking that. Yeah. That is a good question. Well, how much did the 2020 or not 2023, the 2013?
Made like $98 million. So it's
nothing to scoff at. Nothing to scoff at.
But what's a grosser movie, that one or this one? I think that one is a lot more visceral than this movie is.
Yes, I agree. Well, I guess it depends on your definition of grossness, because I did find a grossness to the way it treated its domestic drama, but at the same time, if you're talking
not
about
morally gross, I'm talking aesthetically, physically gross.
Yes. If we're talking about these movies being physically repulsive, I think Fede Alvarez's film is way higher than this one. I think that's a much grosser film. And again,
just because of tone.
No, well, I think it's also because of the tangible quality, like I brought up. I mentioned how Evil Dead Rise, there's so much of it that doesn't feel as tangible as I would like for this franchise.
Definitely some floppy CGI.
If I had to make a comparison, and I think this is more of an extreme comparison, it's not really a clear representation of what I think this film looks or feels like, but if Fede Alvarez's film is John Carpenter's The Thing, then this is The Thing remake, prequel, whatever the hell that was that came out, which was so heavily replaced by CGI in post-production, and you can just tell. And I felt a lot of the same thing happening here. It didn't feel very tangible to me.
Yeah, it's a fair point. It's a very fair point. It is kind of like there might be scenes that are on paper grosser than the Fede Alvarez film, but some of them feel a little bit like the guy's head getting smashed by the giant stone in Hot Fuzz, right? Where it's like, this doesn't exactly feel the same as if it had happened in Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead.
Right. But even at least Fede Alvarez focused on, the little things that tend to bother us, right? Like let's say the cutting in half of a tongue, simple things like that. And Yeah, I will never get that image out of my head. That was that was hard.
I need to rewatch that movie. Actually, it's a good movie.
It's a good movie. Yeah, I'll have to wait till my fiance's out of the room because she will probably never marry me if I'm going to watch that in front of her. But anyway, yeah, Evil Dead Rise.
After you get married, for better.
After
or
I get
worse.
married, yeah. Well, then she might just divorce me. Evil Dead Rise, not. I wasn't a big fan of it, but it sounds like a lot of people are. You know, it sounds like the film has been
I
getting
think the
some
horror crowd was into it.
Yeah, they were. I think it's holding a 69% on Metacritic right now, so it's
Nice.
technically in the green when it comes to their scoring criteria. So clearly, at least I know I'm in the minority on this one, but maybe there's more that sits more that sit in your camp on this one there, Jay. But yeah, not one that I urge people to go and recommend unless you're really a fan of this franchise and you're going to watch it anyway. But yes, Evil Dead Rise was one that we caught up with here. Let's conclude this first segment by talking about the final film that you and I have both seen. Let's talk about Tetris. Not just the game, but the movie Tetris, but this does involve the game. The film was directed...
video game movies here.
That's actually kind of true. I mean, sort of.
Ish.
A video game movie and a movie about a video game.
Yes.
Even so, kind of. we'll get into that. The film was directed by John S. Baird, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. And, of course, stars Taron Egerton. He is playing Hank Rogers, the businessman who won the rights war for the game Tetris. And that is essentially what this is. It's not just about a video game. It's about a rights war for the game Tetris. And it's a very interesting story, one that is very much deserving of cinematic adaptation like we're talking about here. So, Jay, what are your thoughts on
Tetris? I mean, it's this weird era we're in. 2023 is weird. A lot of movies about the branding and marketing and franchising and all that stuff between Air and Tetris and BlackBerry.
That's true. BlackBerry's in there too.
Kind of crop of movies this year, but Tetris is what to say about Tetris? I think it kind of lies in the same zone that we've been talking about here, where I think it is fine. I will say I think this is the best movie of the three that we are going to talk about in this opening segment.
I agree.
Because as annoying as some of its cutesy video game stylization can be, and there's a lot of it, and it gets kind of grating.
Yeah.
The story is almost too good for it not to be a passable movie. It's a fascinating story. I don't know how much of it was fabricated or not, but it is actually, when it wants to be, a pretty taut drama, thriller, really, and also very charming when it wants to be charming. And who knew? The movie about Tetris licensing rights, we've been asking for it for decades, folks, but it's finally here. But it's pretty good. And Roger Allam, shout out, gets to basically play his character from Speed Racer again.
Oh,
which we love. He's in all that prosthetics, looking great. But it is a film that certainly held my attention for the entire time, which for a movie that comes out on a streamer is not necessarily always the case. I did not feel like looking at my phone while I was watching this film. I thought it was very, very entertaining with good performances. And I think this does achieve sort of an emotional core that I appreciated, and it follows through on. And it's a very passable, good time that I would recommend to people. Yeah,
I'm with you. I like this movie quite a bit. I'm kind of sitting in that 3 to 3.5 star range on Letterboxd, which
that's where I am too.
Yeah, for anyone listening who doesn't have a Letterboxd account, which I'd be surprised by at this point.
Generally, I round down, so I do have it at a 3 right now.
I have it. Yeah, I generally round down as well. But yeah, that's a 3 out of 5. We're scoring this on a 5-star system here. But I do think it's passable is certainly the right word, but there are a lot of things about this I actually quite loved. I think Taron Egerton's really good in the film. I think he's got a very good commanding presence. And it sounds like I'm a little bit higher on some of those cute video game isms that we see as scene transitions, especially during this final car chase. And all these cars are sort of morphed into Tetris-like things.
Yeah, that's fun.
I kind of went with it. I mean, I think where it might be a little bit eye-rolly is the use of the song "I Need a Hero," which I think needs to be bucket
They did
listed.
it in Mario too. I mean, it is
We didn't even-
unbelievable
yeah, actually, no,
how
that's a
often they use it.
That's a good point. We didn't even talk about the soundtrack for Super Mario Brothers all that
Bad.
much. Well, especially considering that movie features Chris Pratt, and there are 2 songs in the Mario
Mr.
soundtrack
Blue
that are,
Sky.
and you haven't seen Guardians Volume 3 yet.
I
So
have
there's
not, no.
there's
So
another
there's one
song
there.
in the there's another song in the Super Mario Brothers movie that's featured in Guardians Volume 3.
Interesting.
Yeah, but again, I
was
Need a
watching.
Hero.
What was the other? I was watching another movie recently that also did "I Need a Hero." Didn't they do it in Shazam?
I think they did. Yeah.
God,
I know, yeah. That's another movie we talked about together. I barely forget. I barely remember that whole episode now. That was a movie we saw this year, apparently.
it sure was. It sure was.
Not as good as Tetris. Tetris is actually a pretty good movie. But I that's all that to say that I actually kind of enjoyed the video game cutesy stuff. I think it fit the vibe and the sincerity of the actual story it was telling. Because you're right, this story is so fascinating. It's almost designed to succeed no matter how bad the movie could be, right? Because there's always going to be an interest in what ended up happening with the rights for Tetris, especially as it starts kind of playing with the nostalgia of most of us who grew up in the late 80s into the early 90s. The introduction of the Game Boy, for instance, is referenced here, which is a really neat plot thread going on. And the way that
And
it played,
it's staged almost exactly like when they show the Air Jordan shoe in Air.
there's a lot
It's
of
like-
that here. Yeah, there's a lot of that. You're right. And the way that the movie does, it's interesting. You brought up Air, which is directed by Ben Affleck, because I was going to reference another Ben Affleck film here. The film reminded me a lot of Argo in the way that it kind of fabricates
Yeah.
history for the sake
Yeah.
of, thrilling aesthetic. And Argo
Yeah.
kind of used it to make a point about movie making with relation to history, which I thought was a really nice touch. Here, it's more just a superficial thing, but there is certainly
For
a
sure.
nice touch. Yeah, but at the same time, given the modern conflict in Russia nowadays, there is perhaps a timeliness to it that maybe allows us to forgive some of the superficial elements of its thrills and its car chases and its espionage and all of that. At times, it feels like a Bourne film for Tetris rights.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I kind of like that vibe. It doesn't always land in the emotional beats because, admittedly, I would have liked to see more of the relationship between Hank Rogers and Alexei, what's his name? Alexei Pajitnov, who actually invented the game Tetris. There are a few moments between them that I think are really quite sweet, quite tender. There's a camaraderie between the two of them that's almost brotherly, and the movie is kind of being marketed for their brotherly dynamic, and I just don't think there's enough time between the two of them to sort of sell that 100%. But
It's got too much plot to get through. It's very plotty.
yeah,
movie.
that's true. But that's the thing. It's one of those kind of things where enough of the superficial pieces do fit together. And yes, I did use that pun on purpose because
Ayo.
this is a Tetris
Let's
movie.
go.
So yeah, I like this movie overall.
Yeah, I like this as well. And you talk about that relationship. And what is so interesting about it is that Edgerton, who is playing, hold on, let me look it up, Hank Rogers.
Yep. Hank Rogers.
He truly does have an appreciation for him as a designer. And he really admires what he has created, which I think is a great little flourish that this film has. And it does kind of come back to, what is the angle of this? Are we just supposed to be like, yay, he licensed it from this guy and won and made a lot of money? Yippee.
Well, that's
I mean, it's
that's
kind of
why,
an air problem too.
Well, but that's why you make a really great point about Hank's respect for Alexei and the respect for the artist behind the scenes, right? Because there's an interesting conversation to be made about that middle ground between a business move and an artistic move and whether they can actually coexist, right? And I think there is a moment, at least when Alexei and Hank are spending time together on screen, where this movie could have achieved something really unique. Because it's very easy for a movie like this, at least, to talk about the business aspect just being a business and monetary aspect, and that's not something that we should be applauding, right? Or how the artistic side of it gets a little bit lost. But sometimes they can mingle together. Sometimes an artistic adventure is rightfully earning of some sort of compensation. if it's done in the right way. And this movie could have had some kind of middle ground there. And not to say it should have, but if it did, I think it would have had something to really stand against the crowd.
Yeah, and it is grounded kind of on that relationship with Alexei. And that, again, like most things in this film, pays off in the end and is a little bit touching. Not that this movie is, you're not going to shed a tear watching this movie, but it is sufficient for you to have some level of an emotional investment, and it isn't just, wow, he got a big old check at the end there. That was pretty sick. So, it's got a little bit going on in a similar way where I said Evil Dead Rise has just enough emotional weight to it. This has more than that, but still nothing that you're going to be writing home about or, writing in your diary about how much this movie affected you in some way. So overall, I mean, I'm with you. It's like good, disposable, pretty successful, occasionally interesting, and Taron Egerton is great in it. That's about all I got.
That's about all I got as well.
Air is better than this.
I like Air a lot better than this. I think I like Air a lot more than you did yet. But at the same time,
I liked Air a lot. I liked Air.
Yeah, I think Air is really good. This is not quite in that same camp. You might not shed a tear at the end, like you said, but you might grin. You might grin a little bit, and you might want to play a little bit of Tetris. So I guess the film does succeed in that regard. Tetris is available.
I would not be mad about watching again.
No, it's got a rewatchable quality to it, and sometimes that's all you need for a film like this. I totally agree with that. The film is available to stream right now on Apple TV Plus, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure is.
I think that's where it is. So if you're interested in checking out Tetris, that's where you can watch it right now. Jay, coffee, world's best medicine, right?
The world's best medicine, and I take a dose of it, maybe 2 doses daily. I cannot get through a workday without coffee. Absolutely not. Gotta have my coffee. And when I want coffee, there's only one kind of coffee that I'm going to reach out for.
Yeah, because you like the coffee that actually tastes good. We care about taste. We care about the art of crafting coffee, not just artistically, but also ethically, which is why Coffee Cult is what you need to. That's what you need to look into. Coffee Cult sources only specialty grade Arabica coffee beans from over 50 countries around the world. They inspect each bean and only select the highest grade, which results in a quality of coffee absolutely unmatched. Our good friend JD Duran was nice enough to get us some batches of coffee. I got the Sumatra. I'm not sure which one you have, but it's tasty. Tastes good.
I can't remember which one I got, but it is yummy. That's all I know, and it gets me through the day. I mean, truly, it is. It's better than whatever you have in your.
Oh, it's absolutely better.
I will tell you that it is genuinely very, very good, and I'm very appreciative that JD reached out and got that for us. So we love you, JD, for that one, absolutely. But another thing that's so great about their coffee is not just that it tastes great, but they only source their coffee from farms that pay its workers, and especially their female workers, fairly and equally.
That is so important. I mean, taste is obviously important, but the ethics behind it are certainly what elevates it to the next level. And with regard to taste, we talked about that. Coffee Cult only roasts to order, and they do not ship any stale coffee, anything that's loaded with those preservatives that have been sitting on drugstore shelves for God knows how long. I hate talking bad on them, but this ain't your bag of Folgers. I'll simply say that. This is certainly more artfully crafted than what you would normally get. Every bag of coffee that Coffee Cult produces, it is guaranteed to be extremely fresh. You can select from various coffee blends, other flavors, single coffee, or single origin coffees as well. And if you go to coffeecult.com, that is with a K, coffeecult.com, you'll get 15% off your order if you use our code ISF. We absolutely recommend this product. We trust you're going to love it.
And remember, folks, when it comes to cults, don't drink the Kool-Aid, but do drink the coffee.
The InSession Film Podcast is brought to you by our great friends over at First Time Watchers. Jay, we're catching up on 2023 films, and if there's any podcast out there, film podcast specifically, you need to catch up on, especially one that's going to be concluding pretty soon, the answer is the First Time Watchers. You have to be listening to these guys.
You absolutely do, but good luck keeping up with their film knowledge and their furious conversations that they have on that show. Make sure to check them out because they have always been a great supporter of our show, and they're also one of our favorite podcasts. It's just a good podcast, and it is hosted by Tim, Walter, and Hermano, and if there's one thing you can trust, it's that they're going to put the work in to research the films they're reviewing and give some great discussions.
Have some really interesting discussions as well. They don't always agree, and it leads to some really interesting banter, but it's something you have to listen to. They'll talk about movies and sometimes just life itself. You see what I did there, Jay? You see what I did there? Yeah, because on their latest episode, 490 is this episodic number that they're on. They talk about the movie Life Itself. No, not that one that you might be thinking of. They talked about the Roger Ebert documentary, Life Itself, which was directed by Steve James, if I'm not mistaken. Our good friend Steve James of Hoop Dreams. Yeah. Yeah, they had a great conversation talking about Roger Ebert and his his role in film criticism, which is something that we all hold in high regard. And had a great conversation just on what that means to be a film critic.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's so fun about their show is that every single week they pick out a movie that they've never seen before, they watch it, and they discuss it on their show. And they'll also talk about, what other movies they might have seen, some trailers that have been coming out, all the news and reviews that you could want.
They'll also give some great movie recommendations at the end of their particular episode that ties into everything there. The show is very smart. It's very life-fulfilling. Just about life itself, man. It's just about life itself. So
exactly.
if you and you have to listen to these guys soon because episode 500 will be their final episode. It's a sad day. So until that time, Jay, where can you find these guys on the internet?
Yeah, there's a couple ways you can find them. You can check them out at watchers.podbean.com for the podcast, and you can also hit them up on Twitter at First Time Watchers and on Facebook. Just search. You guessed it, First Time Watchers.
Absolutely. And subscribe to them on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. While you're there, leave them a review and let them know that we're the ones that sent you to them. And we'll do so by asking you to leave a little hashtag this week. What do you think, Jay? Hashtag FTW Tim is life? Something like that?
Yeah, Tim is life. Exactly.
Tim is life. Yeah. Tim thinks I'm life, so I'll just return the favor to him. But anyway, this show is absolutely worth your time. It's smart. It's really great. Again, that is First Time Watchers. As we transition to this next segment, Jay, we have a couple additional films to round out this episode. Films that you caught up with, and then there's one that I also caught up with. Let's start with your picks because you've got two of them, and I'm genuinely curious to hear what you have to say about these. One of them being The Covenant. No, sorry, Guy Ritchie's The Covenant.
Yeah, please.
We have to be very clear about that. We got to show some respect to Ritchie here. We'll start with that one. So why don't you talk about that film for a little bit?
Guy Ritchie is a director that I feel like I like a good bit more than kind of your average cinephile or whatever you want to categorize us as. And he came out with a film a couple years ago called Wrath of Man, which was in my top 20 of its year. I thought
I forgot how much you like that one. That's incredible.
Yeah, and I thought it was a nice kind of pivot from Ritchie, who has made... He started as the Tarantino, the British Tarantino ripoff guy. And I like plenty of those films. I still think Snatch is his best movie. But Wrath of Man was something kind of different. It was darker and more serious and somber and just generally more grown up. And so I was excited about him moving more in that direction. And then this year he had a couple of movies, one of which is kind of the old Guy Ritchie, which is called, God, what was it called? I can't even remember.
Operation Fortune or something like that?
Operation Fortune, Rouge to something. I can't remember.
Something to something. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, just call it Operation Fortune. And that movie is more in the vein of old Ritchie, where it's this kind of slick film with this big cast with a lot of big names. And it's a film where there's nothing wrong with it, but I was completely unsatisfied when it ended. It was fascinating, and it's got this great score. And I love Statham. Aubrey Plaza's kind of wasted. I like the cast a lot, but it just added up to very little for me. And so I was just thinking, is he kind of over that phase of his career? Is he over the Man from Uncle, Snatch, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels phase of his career? And then I saw The Covenant, which is more in the vein of Wrath of Man, this more serious, adult-minded film. And this is a military movie. You see the trailer for the film, and you're like, oh, is this a Peter Berg movie? Because that's kind of the energy it has.
It kind of does. Yeah, it reminded me of Lone Survivor. At least the marketing did.
Yeah, totally. And it is.
Yeah.
It does not have all of the trademarks of a Guy Ritchie film. Interestingly, he can't totally help himself. You know how Guy Ritchie loves to put like graphics on screen of this guy's name is TikTok Magoo. And
yeah.
In this one,
so this film still has some of that.
It in the smallest ways possible. It's like they will say a character's name, and then his name will just come up in white font on the screen, or somebody will say, IED, and then they will have the what IED stands for written out on the screen without anybody actually saying it. It's very weird, but I didn't mind it. It's a little bit of an interesting flourish, and Lord knows Guy Ritchie has a lot of flourishes in his films.
Yeah.
But this movie, I liked a lot. I think this is one of my favorite movies of the year so far. I thought this movie was very, very good. And
wow. Okay.
The first hour of this one kind of feels a little Black Hawk Downish in the sense that this film takes place in 2018 in Afghanistan. And there is this sense in the first hour of what the hell are we doing over here? Men are getting murdered, and for what? Okay. And it is this really, really good story. I don't think it's based on a true story at all, but it's the story of this soldier who is working with a Afghani interpreter, and really they are equally the stars of the film. So you have Jake Gyllenhaal as the I believe he's a sergeant, and then you have Dar Salim, who plays the interpreter. And for about half the movie, it's really his movie more than Gyllenhaal's. And he is really, really good in this movie. And kind of the sacrifices that he makes in this film on behalf of Gyllenhaal is honestly pretty inspiring, without ever going into this like rah rah USA wave the American flag kind of thing, going for it. And so good. There have been allegations of this being kind of a white savior movie towards the latter half, but I did not get that at all. I think really what it's about is it's about how broken the state of the world is right now, that this guy had to go back. This battered, beaten, broken man was forced to go back and battle the Taliban to save this man, as opposed to the U.S. government just helping this man, this war hero who saved his life, to bring him to safety with a visa to America. So I think it's a fairly complicated film as far as what it's saying. It's not interesting. I think the Peter Berg films can kind of get that way. And I don't think this movie is that at all. And I think Gyllenhaal is great. He's getting more and more. He'll go big. He is getting bigger and bigger with some of his roles. And there are some scenes here where they're just like, all right, Jake, you get to play PTSD here. You get to play angry, bitter soldier guy. And he lets loose. He absolutely lets loose. But the real revelation in this is Dar Salim, who plays the interpreter. And his character is so rich, I think. He's got this pregnant wife, and essentially when you become an interpreter for the U.S. military in Afghanistan, there is you're wanted. The Taliban is out to get you. You have essentially, in their eyes, betrayed everything that they stand for and represent. And as he continues to not just work for the U.S. military, but really becomes an asset for them and begins to really sympathize with Jake Gyllenhaal's character. He becomes such, he becomes the very sympathetic character who's going through so much, and you see the stakes of his life in this situation. And the action sequences in the film are extraordinarily visceral. And I gotta say, the composer, this is like Guy Ritchie's new guy, and let me get his name because he is.
Jay, I'm so proud of you. You're now starting to look up movie scores even more than JD and I.
I think he is one of the most underrated composers working right now, and his name is Chris Benstead. And he did Operation Fortune, which has a banging soundtrack. As mediocre as I think that movie is, the soundtrack in it is great. And he did Wrath of Man, and he did The Gentleman, and now he did this film. And those are his only 4 big movies that he's composed. And they're all great. And this film, it oscillates between this stringy, very moody score, and then there's also these moments of real tenderness and humanity that he underlines so well in this movie. And the cinematography as well. I mean, there is stuff to admire about this movie artistically, which is not something that you would have really thought about early in Guy Ritchie's career, or at least not in the ways that this film does. He was always such a showy director, and there is a little bit of that in this film, but he really takes advantage of kind of the infinite depth of field of the digital technology and the way that he goes back and forth from, handheld to steady cams and far away shots and intense close-ups, and his dream sequences that play with the focus of the camera. I think it's really, really wonderful stuff. This is one of my favorite movies of the year. I hope everybody else checks it out and likes it. But I'm a little bit of a, I don't know, I'm not a Guy Ritchie like stan or anything, but I like Guy Ritchie. You
like a lot of his
movies,
though. Yeah, because I'm not a big Guy Ritchie fan, but there are some of his films I do like, but you certainly like him more than I do.
Yeah, and now Hercules, get excited. We're all super stoked for that. As good as Aladdin was, let's go.
Does this, at least the Covenant specifically, despite the I guess the more stripped back serious approach here comparatively to other films, does it still at least feel like it was directed by Guy Ritchie despite the attempt at something different?
There are, knowing Guy Ritchie fairly well, on my original podcast, I did Director's Series podcast on that, and we did Guy Ritchie, so I got pretty deep into Guy Ritchie lore.
Gotcha.
His style, and there are definitely sequences in this film where you do feel it. I mean, like I said, the pop-up text, it is really interesting at the beginning of the movie. He gives all of his characters nicknames, and the Gentleman, everybody's like, oh, he's Poppycock Donovan. And in this one, everybody has a nickname, and everybody's nickname is in white letters on the screen.
Okay,
so like, oh, here's Guy Ritchie. Here he goes.
I can picture that. Yeah.
And there's one flashback sequence that I think is very reminiscent of the stuff that he did in Wrath of Man and weirdly King Arthur, where you have this. He uses this really, really wide lens on these intense close-ups.
Okay.
To give this really disorienting shot, and I think it's incredibly effective, especially with the way that he's screwing around with the focus. In this movie, that scene, the flashback scene, which if you'll see the movie, you'll know it when you see it, to me is incredibly evocative. It is so expressionistic and compelling.
I will have to add this to the list.
I don't know. It's a good movie. I think it's like a very good movie.
It sounds like, is it one of Guy Ritchie's best films according to you then? Like, if you were to rank his films, is this like upper tier at the very least? Yeah,
I would say number 1 will probably always be Snatch for me. Number 2 is Wrath of Man. 3 is probably Man from Uncle.
Wow.
I would say this. I might like this more than Man from Uncle.
All right, because I have to watch Wrath of Man again. I didn't really care for that when I first saw it. Man from Uncle, I didn't care for either. Snatch, I'm not a fan of either.
Oh my God! All right, you're not gonna like this movie. Just don't watch it, Brendan.
I love Rock and Rolla, and
I like Rock and Rolla too. That would be my 5. I like that one.
I also really do like Lock,
I only
Stock,
like
and Two Smoking-
half of his movies, but
Yep, same here. I like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels.
see, that's the one that I don't really like.
Interesting. I don't like his Sherlock Holmes movies.
I like the first one.
Trying to think of what else. I haven't seen Revolver.
Revolver is bananas. And Swept Away is maybe one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
Well, hearing people describe both of those movies like that make me really want to watch those too.
Revolver is worth seeing. Swept Away, I don't think is.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. That's what I've heard. But from what I have seen from Guy Ritchie, he's been very hit or miss for me. But Wrath of Man is one even though I didn't really care for it at the time, it's one that I've always wanted to give another shake. Because of the response that it has received from not just you, but Guy Ritchie fans and the new direction that he went on. And even J.D. Duran on the show was a fan of it as well, if I'm not mistaken. The Gentleman I thought was pretty good. I had some fun with The Gentleman.
I
thought
that
one was
I
thought that was okay.
Movie.
Yeah, definitely. I'll have to add The Covenant to the list. Maybe it'll
I'm also the number one King Arthur stan. Let's go.
I don't hate
Midnight, King Arthur, folks.
I don't hate that movie. That is one I have seen. I don't hate it. I think at times it kind of rocks. Doesn't fully rock, but at times it kind of does. But yeah, anyway, The Covenant I'm going to have to add to my list. That's one I'm definitely looking forward to. Another film that you saw is the World War II revenge flick Sisu, which I've been hearing some good things about. What did you think about that one?
Yeah, this is another one I liked. The two that I liked the most are the ones that you haven't seen, so you'll have to check these out.
So unfortunate, man. So unfortunate.
Sisu, have you seen the trailer?
Oh yeah. Well, admittedly, I did try watching this in preparation.
Oh, that's right.
For
You started it. Yeah.
I got 30 minutes in, but then I had to pause to go to bed. I just admittedly haven't had a chance to finish it. But I'll say this: I can't give a full review of the movie because I haven't finished it. But what I saw in the first 30 minutes, I thought was pretty awesome. So I was really enjoying it at that point.
Yeah, I like this movie, and it's interesting because it advertises itself as this really over the top John Wick World War II style movie.
Yeah.
But in reality, it has this really naturalistic aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
It's very patiently paced, and it's more peppered with visceral violence than just this onslaught of constant action. And I really liked that approach. It should not be written off as World War II John Wick.
Yeah.
If you think John Wick is a calm, stoic, quiet figure, get ready to meet this guy, whose name is not Sisu, but that is the title of the movie. He says, I think, like 3 words in the movie. So,
all right.
That is what you're in for, and Brendan, I'm sure you've seen that so far. But
yeah, I definitely saw that sense of patience that you're talking about in between bursts of violence, and even that those bursts of violence that I did see. It kind of reminded me of more of a grindhouse film at times, and especially when I got to the point where I am seeing enough chapter titles come up on screen, like Chapter 1, the Gold, Chapter 2, like the Nazis,
that felt
and
Tarantino-y to
me. Or kind of Sergio Leone in a way, which is when you say something feels like Sergio Leone, you might as well say it also feels like Tarantino.
Exactly. Yeah, I was about to say.
But it does kind of have those like 1960s vibes, despite a real patient quality underneath. And again, I don't know if I'll feel like the whole film is like that, but what I did see, I was getting that, and I really did. I respected that approach.
Yeah, I think it's a genuinely good-looking movie. I enjoyed looking at it, especially with all the location shooting. There's a lot to appreciate from that regard. I think it's a well-directed movie from Finnish filmmaker Jalmari Helander. So we'll see what he does next. But this movie did relatively well at the box office, considering what it is, which is kind of cool. But there's a lot to like here. I mean, the lead performance from Yorma Tomila. Again, very quiet, has to be all presence, and he really has that presence. And he really sells all the action. You're right about it being kind of grindhousey. It gets very pulpy, but very fun at the same time. So there is this weird balancing act of this very composed, quiet, patient film about this guy who's been through so much, and this ultra violent grindhouse movie, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think it somehow manages to find the appropriate balance, which I think is impressive.
That's hard to do. It's hard for any movie to do because they're just such extremes.
It is. And the one thing I will say about it is it kind of sells itself short at the end, in my opinion, by going a little too over the top.
Oh, okay.
And it knocked it down a half a star or whatever in the last 15, 20 minutes. Despite the fact that
like it gets a little too pulpy. Is that what you're saying by the end?
In a vacuum, it's like, oh, that was a cool scene, but in the context of the movie, it's like, this doesn't. I think this really affects the way I feel about the character in this film. But again, if you go scene by scene, wholly entertaining, and I really admire its approach, which is not to be John Wick, World War II, but to be this much more internal film. And I really enjoyed that, and I liked the film a lot.
Yeah, and I was enjoying what I was seeing. I haven't gotten that far to the final 15 or 20 minutes when it starts to emphasize that pulpiness, although you're not the first I've heard say it does that. And I mean, again, I might find a consistency there. So this is kind of a to be continued review for me, I guess. I'm kind of giving it a half review. But I do plan on finishing it before the year's end because I am genuinely curious what to make from it. But I did enjoy the 20 to 30 minutes I did see. And you're right. What I did latch onto in those early moments is that it's a beautiful looking movie. It just goes to show how being on location, not surrounded by green screens, matters.
It makes a difference.
It really does. Yeah. I'm going to transition to one last film before we round out this episode, and it's a documentary that's also available on Apple TV Plus. And I mentioned in the intro, it's one I highly recommend everyone checking out, which is enough of a spoiler to say that I did enjoy this movie, and that is Still, a Michael J. Fox movie. Apparently it was just called Still, but the tagline was added to really distinguish what this actually is, because a movie called Still means very little, but I do think it is a very appropriate title given the story of Michael J. Fox himself. This movie is based on his own memoirs. The film was also directed by documentary filmmaker Davis Guggenheim, I believe his name is, who is mostly known for films like Inconvenient Truth, also the music documentary It Might Get Loud, which I really enjoyed as well. And here he does some really interesting things with Michael J. Fox's history and his story. His allowance of letting Michael J. Fox really just be himself, narrating himself, and the trouble it takes to actually get that right, given Michael J. Fox's unfortunate history with Parkinson's disease. But the film is very much about that sense of perseverance, and there's a sense of bravery to it I really liked. So when you look at it from just the angle alone, it's a very sweet and tender and brave movie about those things, and his relationship with his wife. Was it Tracy Pollan, I believe her name was? I'm totally blanking on that name. You have to fact check me on one, Jay, to make sure that I'm accurate. And yeah, Tracy Pollan, that was her name. But anyway, the relationship that they had and what they did to keep themselves strong, I think is really respectful. But where the film really works as an impressive documentary is it's in the editing. This is easily one of the best edited movies of the year, documentary or not. And a lot of that is the way it tries to find this synergy between archival footage, new footage of kind of like these recreations of sorts, and then, of course, the actual interview footage of Michael J. Fox now. Because we're utilizing a lot of historical footage from Family Ties, the many television shows from Michael J. Fox's career, and they splice them with what Michael J. Fox was going through at the time. So, for instance, we have this classic story of Michael J. Fox finally signing on to the first Back to the Future, which came out in 1985. And something I did not know, he apparently had to shoot that at night and film Family Ties in the morning. And he did that every day, which means in the morning he would get picked up by a driver, taken the Family Ties. That same driver or some other driver would take him to the whatever shooting location Back to the Future was filming on that night. Then he'd go back to bed and maybe get 3 hours of sleep and do the whole thing over again. But the way they splice that with scenes from Family Ties, it'll be of him arriving on set, walking through the door, saying something like, "Sorry, I'm late." And little things like that, it's kind of brilliant. And normally I'm someone that doesn't like recreative footage, especially if it's not the actual actor playing him. But the way they utilize that to sort of create those, really create those edits and make it as seamless as possible is kind of brilliant.
Is it actual footage from the TV show, or it's like
It is.
Oh, okay, okay. So it is still archival footage.
But like when we see footage of, let's say, a car picking him up at his apartment, that's recreated because we'll see him from the back.
Okay.
So it kind of creates this it kind of creates like this like fictional element to it, but it's only there for interjecting within the editing process to kind of create this synergy between history and what his story was. And it's really interesting the way that those parallels happen. There's even more with regard to his show on Spin City, and how that parallel between his time and the guy and how he felt like he needed to hide his Parkinson's condition from people. And the way they splice that in, you kind of get a sense of what you're noticing. You could see him trying to hide it on set, and it's really interesting from a filmmaking standpoint. And of course, it's, given the story of Michael J. Fox himself, the strength and perseverance of it all, it's really heartwarming. It really is. I think it does end a little bit briskly in trying to wrap some of those things up, but getting to that point, if you told me that this movie and John Wick Chapter 4 were the two best edited movies of the year so far, I would be very surprised to say that, but that's how I'm feeling right now. I think it's a really well-made documentary.
Yeah, this is one I'm definitely going to check out. What's your relationship with Michael J. Fox in general? I don't even know. Are you a big Back to the Future guy?
I love the first one quite a bit. I like all three. I do. I love the first one. I think the second and third are pretty good. They're not my... Well, actually, it's weird to say. I think given his entire career, they're probably some of Robert Zemeckis' better films now. Yeah. But I wasn't, aside from Back to the Future, I wasn't really an active Michael J. Fox viewer growing up. Occasionally Family Ties would be on in the background in my household, but I never really paid much attention to it. Weirdly, as a kid, I think I watched more reruns of the movie Teen Wolf than I did Family Ties, which is kind of a guilty pleasure of mine.
On like ABC Family or something.
I think they played it a lot on MTV as well or something.
Maybe that's what it was.
Yeah, I think it was kind of at that transition point when MTV was trying to get away from music and be a bit more on pop culture. Teen Wolf was one I watched quite a bit, but Back to the Future I do love. And again, Spin City was another one of those shows that played a lot in the background in my household, but I never really paid attention to it. So, but Michael J. Fox is always liked because what this documentary talks about was how his comedic timing was just unlike anything else. And not to say that he was one of the funniest people on the planet at that time. It was really more about the way that he utilized call and answer responses, the way he responded to certain things and how that just got such a laugh out of people because it was so innocent. It was so natural. And that's really what garnered so many Emmy nominations and wins for him with roles like in Family Ties, for instance. So the documentary does talk about that very directly. And I think it does a good job showing why he was so talented to begin with.
Yeah, again, what I'm really looking forward to, that they're doing some interesting documentaries kind of about people in this way.
Yeah.
I feel like those are very popular right now. Between my favorite last year was Senior, which is kind of
Oh,
feels
yeah.
like it has similar vibes a little bit to.
Yeah, Senior is less energetic because it wasn't really about the process of making that. You know, like the process of making a movie like Senior.
So I see. Kind of like the editing. Is it sort of what's the David Bowie one? I mean, it's not going to be that crazy.
It's not it's not dreamlike in that way, but there is an energy and a sensibility to it where Davis Guggenheim is. I don't want to say he's trying to make it cinematic, but he's creating parallels. The editing is tricky. I'll say that. You know, it's definitely trying to be a little bit tricky.
Got it. Yeah, I mean it's it looks good is all I can say, and I'm looking forward to watching it. And you've only got me more excited to watch it. So and
that's
it's been
the whole
a
point of
slow
the segment.
year so far for documentaries. So
I think more will pick up, and I think this is one of the good ones to start off whatever documentaries we'll hopefully get as the year comes to a close. I think that's a great place to end this episode, Jay. We're doing good on time. We're doing pretty good on time, but we got through 6 movies. We got through 6 movies in under 90 minutes at this point. But before we conclude this weekend's episode, let's talk about this week's poll.
It's real bad, okay? I don't like those numbers at all.
Just one poll? Those things aren't scientific.
Yes, they are. All this is science. This is math.
All right, so for this, we're taking it back at the Furious franchise. Obviously, Fast X is available right now. We're using that as inspiration to ask all of you, what is your favorite action sequence from the Fast and Furious franchise? We threw out quite a few options here. This is actually one that JD came up with, and he had some great ideas as far as action sequences we can consider here. I mean, there's thousands that you can really consider when you think about it. And we did get a few votes here on the poll. But it was kind of a how many do we have here? It was kind of a 7-horse race when we really think about it. We had a winner here being the vault sequence from Fast 5 at 25%. But we had a vote or two here and there for pretty much a bunch of these other ones. The submarine chase from the Fate of the Furious, the prison fight from the Fate of the Furious, the Dubai car jump from Furious 7, the tank chase from Fast and Furious 6. There's also the opening train sequence from Fast 5, and then the final race from the very first film, The Fast and the Furious. I think if there's any theme with this, Jay, well, it's really 2 things. First off, Fast 5 is absolutely when this franchise flipped, like we talked about on episode 534. And the other thing, too, something we talked about when we did our little Fast and Furious retrospective on that episode, we talked quite a bit about how the Fate of the Furious is kind of the most frustrating film in the franchise because of how strong its action sequences are, but it doesn't really work as a film in totality. Right. And I feel like these results on this poll are kind of mirroring that same thing because you had some love for even just the prison fight in the film. And, of course, the submarine chase. So there was a lot of love for some of the sequences in that film as well.
Yeah, I mean, we talked plenty about Fast and Furious last week, and I mentioned that my favorite is Furious 7. And I would go with my favorite set piece in those films as the Etihad Towers car jump sequence. And it wasn't really the first jump that did it for me. It was when they did it again.
Well, that's where it created that self-awareness, right? Where you just knew it's like that's the laugh factor right there.
Yes, it is. And like we said last week, you know, it is. That movie is kind of the perfect one because it still does have that sincerity while kind of understanding what it is and having that self-awareness. But that's my favorite one. I mean, there's plenty of great ones, obviously. And it really does feel like, if you want to say the most important one, the one that kind of turned the franchise into a new era, it is that bank vault scene from Fast 5. But there's plenty of great ones to choose from, even in the films that I don't think are quite as good.
Yeah, I mean, even like F9, for instance, the entire tanker chase towards the end, I think, has some good qualities to it, especially when the whole magnetic cars aspect of it is introduced. But you're right, the bank vault in Fast 5, that whole sequence really is the turning point. And this is something that we talked about on this episode when we reviewed it some time ago. I think it was when COVID first happened. We were looking for some films to talk about. We chose to talk about Fast 5. And what's so great about that sequence is how it's kind of pulled off by accident. I mean, like the context of the movie, they have this elaborate plan to pull off this heist, and it gets completely foiled before they even have a chance to start it. So they're basically forced to improvise. And when that vault is pulled out of that wall, like, you want to talk about a sense of lunacy that just you can't help but laugh and smile. That is that shot for me. And yeah, I think that is probably the best one here. It's probably an obvious answer, but sometimes the obvious answer is ultimately the right one. So anyway, thanks to everyone who voted on this poll. We really do appreciate some feedback and love there with regard to the Fast and Furious franchise. Jay, I think that will conclude the proceedings for this episode. Really appreciate you being here, man. Keeping things a little tighter, here. Hour 34 is my timestamp right now. But of course, this might change with promos and everything.
Uphold.
Yeah. I feel like we're doing pretty good. A few plugs as we conclude this episode. I mentioned this a few times, but I'll go ahead and mention it again. Episode 534, we did a quick Fast and Furious retrospective and also talking about the best franchise flippers. That was myself, JD, and Jay over here talking about those. We have a full Fast 10, fasten your seatbelts, whatever it's called. That review is available now between JD and Ryan. We'll also have some upcoming reviews, hopefully pretty soon, of the film How to Blow Up a Pipeline. And of course, coming out pretty soon, another Disney live-action remake, The Little Mermaid. So the one that we'll have to dedicate a full review to as well. And on that note, with regard to next week on the main show, episode 536, Jay, because our first Disney animation power rankings episode on 533 was so great and led to no drama whatsoever, we're going to do it again. We're going to do at least something like that again.
Let's do it.
So with the release of The Little Mermaid, we decided we'll go ahead and do a power ranking of the Disney Renaissance era. I think that's 10 films that are included in that era. So we'll more or less do the exact same exercise, hopefully between the four of us, and doing a collective ranking of the Renaissance era, which is probably going to be the one that gets us most in trouble if there are any bad opinions, because most of our listeners are probably around our same age who grew up with the Renaissance era. So we're treading some dangerous waters here. This will be an interesting one. It is. We live up to it, though. We're going to try our best. I also want to take a second to plug our latest Women in Session. Kristen Battistella and Zeta Short talk about their favorite.
We're making a lot of content these days.
We are making a lot of content. Yeah, if I do say so myself, it's a lot of good content. Yeah. For this episode of Women in Session, the two women here talk about their favorite Palme d'Or winners. Of course, that's appropriate given the Cannes Film Festival that's going on. They had a great conversation highlighting some really great films, especially the 1945 masterpiece, Brief Encounter. Lovely film, one of my all-time favorites. Had some great thoughts there. Be sure to check that out. Jay, movie series pick. You're still in the middle of Wong Kar-wai, aren't you guys?
We sure are. We are taking our sweet time, but we will have a new episode coming out this week for a little film called In the Mood for Love. So
hashtag masterpiece
for that. It is a masterpiece, but if you want to hear further thoughts on that masterpiece, make sure to check out our episode. We have a lot of interesting things to say about it, and then just 3 more Wong films after that. And
yeah,
they're interesting ones. They are interesting ones.
Yeah, In the Mood for Love is also a film that JD and I talked about on the main show on the old format. So if you want as much Wong Kar-wai content as you must have, you'll have my thoughts and JD's thoughts, and then now you'll have Jay and Ryan's fresh thoughts on this film. You'll have the whole collective of InSession Film saying it's one of the greatest movies ever made, if I do say so myself. Really great film. Looking forward to that conversation. Of course, if you like what you're hearing and you like what you're seeing, you can follow us on social media at InSession Film. You can also subscribe to us here on YouTube, and we're also on your favorite podcast app of choice. Leave us a review there, whether it be Spotify, Apple, whatever that is, or hit us up on Patreon for exclusive content there at patreon.com/InSessionFilm. Jay, thanks for joining me on this endeavor as we get closer to seeing more movies from the year 2023. hopefully more to do. I gotta say, given the fact that we haven't seen much from this year, I haven't been loving as many films as I usually do from this year. It hasn't been as heavy on the heavy hitters for me, but again, we just haven't seen enough of them yet.
And it always happens every year. You get to November, and all of a sudden it's boom,
like
boom, 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 boom. And we got some big ones coming out here in a few months too. I
We
will
do.
say, I know we were only talking about films that haven't gotten official reviews here, but I'll just shout out one movie that I did really like that did get a review.
Okay.
I really liked Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh my gosh. Am I the one curmudgeon on this movie?
I had a ball with that thing. That was so fun. And it understood, it had such a firm grasp on its tone, and it's visually compelling. It is so inventive in the way that it approaches its visuals. There's that one scene where I can't remember her name, the girl from It. Her character,
Oh, yeah.
who can turn into various animals. There's this tracking shot where she changes into all different kinds of animals and very inventively goes through all of these small corridors to escape these guards. And I remember that movie was over, and I was like, I got to make sure that that's on my long list for best scenes of the year at the end of the year, because I thought it was thrilling and so inventive.
Okay.
It's a great. I really like that movie a lot. I had a ball with it.
I guess I
One of
gotta
the
watch it
probably
again.
the best cameo of the year too.
I gotta watch it again because everything you're saying you like about it, I did not see in this movie. I had a very different
The
reaction.
visual
I really
invention,
did.
I think, is apparent.
I thought it looked boring. I thought it looked boring as hell. I didn't
Some
like
of it
the look
does,
of the
and a
movie.
lot of the CGI isn't great. But as far as the way that they compose their shots and use the camera very thoughtfully, I had a great time. And they did the same thing in Game Night, so it's not surprising. But
Well, then again, yeah, I will say Game Night I didn't love as much either. So maybe I'm just not on that directing those wavelength as much as others. Again, could be more of a me thing than an actual thing.
I also appreciated that it was just a true comedy. It was a comedy.
I like the idea. I'm not going to get into it. Ryan and I gave a full review of that movie where I gave my thoughts as to why the film didn't work for me. But again, I'm willing to give it another shot because I was probably just in the wrong headspace when I saw it. That's entirely possible. We've been wrong many times in our lives when it comes to movies. And the strength is that we know when to admit that we're wrong. So I'll give it another shot someday. And maybe I'll come around to it. Jay, you and I don't disagree much. But when we do, we find stuff to go back and forth on. But I think for the sake of time, we have to cut this conversation a little bit short. Anyway, thanks again for joining me on this endeavor as we catch up on some 2023 films. And thanks to all of you for listening. We will see you all next time on the InSession Film Podcast. We win. Timestamps. We're good.
Covenant Hive, rise up.
That sounds like a great band name.